Yes. Well, do you want to wait until we do this part and then? Okay. I'm just waiting for Jenny to get back in here before we do the other part, so she'll have record of everything. Please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'd like to make a motion that council did not discuss anything in the closed meeting other than the items for which it was convened.
We have a motion to certify. Do we have a second? Motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We are moving forward on the hiring of the city manager for Radford, and as such, council has come to a general consensus on a job posting. We've asked our Director of Human Resources, Dawn Diamond, to take it and to finish that document and go on and put it out there for us and then move forward with a process. Our plan is to advertise hopefully by the end of this week with applications running through the end of business on April 7th. To begin reviewing and working on interviews following that, with interviews in the late April, early May timeframe, hopefully, and then moving forward with a July 1st hire is the plan. Do we have a motion that we adopt the job position description as well as the hiring plan for the city manager?
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion is second. Any discussion? All in favor, please respond by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we're going to get going here in just 1 minute on budget-related things. Thank you all so much. Okay. Mr. Meadows, budget has been on everybody's mind, clearly, where we are with our finances, the revenue anticipation note, how we're working through things, trying to make sure, that we've discussed things on multiple occasions and looking at any potential opportunities for cost savings, revenue enhancement, whatever we need to do. So we'll begin by turning the floor over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. It's good to see everybody this evening. Budget has certainly been on the minds of a lot of folks over the last couple of weeks, and I think it really began to come into focus after last Monday night's presentation from the auditors. The city has some challenges financially. As I've said since I came on board, the issue as I see it continues to be an issue with a little bit of a imbalance in the budget, a structural imbalance, I think, with the way the general fund in particular has been done the last couple of years. And it's an issue of cash flow. The money is available when we need funds to pay bills. It's just we have not been able to match up the funds flow with making all the bills current like we would like to see. I know the council has asked a lot of questions about the revenues. I know that there's been discussion about potential changes to the budget, that including this year's budget, to perhaps make some adjustments to try to address some of that. I've sent a lot of information back and forth regarding tax rates and regarding information on potential adjustments to the budget. I'm certainly willing to talk about any and all of that tonight. I think, as I suggested to several of you today in emails, I think tonight is an opportunity really for the council to try to reach some consensus on areas that you think may merit further attention. One of the challenges as we've talked about is some of the numbers come straight from the financials and straight out of the budget book. But when there's particular questions about, well, what if you trim these hours, or what if you cut back this program? especially when it's related to the personnel associated costs that may be involved with that. That's really something that'll take a little time to develop. It's really hard to do a lot of what-if scenarios with those until staff has a little better feel as to what it is exactly that you'd like to see us focus in on. So I'm glad to try to answer any questions tonight. Callista's here. I appreciate Dawn staying as well. Dawn's here. We're here to try to answer any questions and just listen to you tonight to see if there's any areas that you want us to focus in on to begin to make adjustment.
I want to ask one quick question.
Yes, sir.
In one of your emails, you talked about brush collection. Is that the leaf collection, or is that?
That's, my understanding, brush collection is when they go out with the picker and pick up.
But that is a charged piece. Now,
Yes.
In April, though, we typically do a reduced fee. Leaf collection in the fall is a totally separate piece from that. That is, and I don't know if you had that, Craig, as part of your structure, that it goes on October, November, and December typically, where they make 4 or 5 rounds of passes through the city to pick up the leaves. So that's a separate piece. That's about a $30,000 expense. We've looked at that before,
Leaf.
to do all that, the leaf collection.
But these numbers that talk about 33,056 and 45 were additional costs that weren't covered by the fees that we asked for. Is that?
Those are expenses that are incurred to deal with the brush and the mulching. So I did not get a figure on the fees in terms of what we collect in terms of fees. I can do
So
that.
this is the cost after we picked it up and taken it, where do we take it? Out to the landfill
We
somewhere?
take it,
And then we pay to
Drop
have
Center
it?
has a mulch site next to it, that after it's been mulched, it's dropped there.
yeah, Jenny has some info too on where it's hauled.
Yeah, it's often hauled to either the drop center or that Ingalls Mountain landfill, and then they like wood chip it up, and then they do that free mulch off of, that's
Park
Park.
Road.
Yeah, off
So
of Park Road.
I'm still looking though for where these
fees.
figures are coming from,
I
33,000.
can pull like the fees we charge real quick for what your small and large load collection are.
Those fees came from Public Works. Those are the amounts that I was
We may
told.
need a clarification on the separation of the scheduled brush pickup versus other citywide brush pickups and the leaf collection to make sure we're not talking about
Okay,
two
yeah,
or three
because I'm
different
real,
things.
Numbers that I quoted in that email today, Councilman Wolford, were what was shared with me from Public Works, that we pay a third party to come in and mulch down the brush collection that we collect every year.
okay, so that sounds like after we've picked it up and dumped it
That-
somewhere,
that's
then we
correct.
pay somebody to come in and
And deal with it.
chew it up, but they leave it with us, or they haul it off? They leave it with us. So we're just paying them that to chew it up? Okay.
So what if we didn't pay, I mean, what if we took this off? We just dump it somewhere, is that,
Room to store the materials.
oh,
We
we
have
can't
to-
just
we have-
take it to somewhere else and just leave it and not have it shipped and bring it back? We have
deal-
to,
My understanding is we have to deal with it.
okay.
If we collect it, we have to deal with it.
But we don't
So,
know,
wha-
I'm sorry, Kelly.
So if we have to do it, are we just having this as a discussion to see if we can find somebody cheaper? What is the potential savings? I guess I'm not understanding. If we have to do it and we have to chip it up and we have to bring it back to us because there's no other option, then,
Citizens can haul their brush directly to the landfill.
okay, so
and-
okay.
Or pay another private company to come do it if it's more than they're able to manage.
Okay, so eliminating us picking up and having to.
Once we pick
chip
it
and
up, it's
stuff.
our responsibility to
gotcha.
have to deal with it. That's what that cost is involved with.
But we don't know those who, if I call and say, come get my brush and I pay you $35 to pick it up, we don't know if that $35 is offsetting any of this 33. That's
Well,
part
the
we
short,
don't know.
the short answer to that is it would be, but we were just looking, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't know the revenue side of that answer, but we can find it.
So before we get too deep, one of the pieces I'd like to talk about, this isn't something new that we just began discussing here recently. This has been going on for years, but specifically within this budget year, July 29th, 2024, we held a special meeting with city after several meetings in the month of July to talk about strategies for adjusting the budget to pay off the RAN and looking at the revenue increases we had had and everything along that line. Within that, we had discussed three options. Option A, which was a total of $946,100 and included a number of significant pieces that were some were reductions, some were planned concepts for reduction, some were delays of expenditures and things along that line, and then an increase of that took it to 5% of the general fund of a $1,163,557 savings, and then a 10% option C of $2.3 million, basically. Now, having had some discussion with Mr. Meadows, it appears that not as much as what we may have thought of council was happening with these options was actually taking place. So I think that's a starting point maybe for us to discuss, because there was a pretty significant framework looked at with that included potential savings across the city with different departments, programs, and activities, and to go from there. So Craig, do you have comments or thoughts you want to make on that as we get started?
I can, Mayor, and this somewhat ties into some information that I think David, the former city manager, sent out in September as well, talking about the options again and some potential reductions. As I think I shared with the council, I reviewed that information with the department directors, and my understanding from the department directors were that these amounts were items that could be deferred, i.e. not paid in the first part of the year, but deferred to the later part of the fiscal year. But many of those items were obligations that had to be paid within the fiscal year. They were not cuts per se, so.
We're just deferring our payment.
Right. You
Not
know,
saving, just deferring it.
right, and so I've heard several times the comments about, option A was 946,000 in reductions, option B, option C. Well, some of those amounts were deferral. I'm not saying all of them, I'm not saying that some of them could not ultimately be reductions, but my understanding from looking through all the information is those were items that could be deferred until later in the fiscal year, but they were never taken out of the budget. The budget doesn't reflect any of these reductions in this fiscal year.
So how soon can we have some figures on reduction?
When I met with the department directors 2 weeks ago and shared this with them, what I heard from most of them was that, again, those were deferrals. They were not cuts. Some of those things are for service contracts. Some of those things are for overtime that has since been spent for various reasons. So, those are areas that have been identified. We could, if you wanted to go back to, say, option A and say, of those amounts that are there, what could be reduced out of the budget between now and the end of the fiscal year, we could look at that. It's not going to be anywhere close to $946,000.
Well, I'm more interested in saying to them, we want, for the next budget, we want a 5% cut in expenses, at least a 5%.
I think we've got to look at that more intentionally in each area as to what that actually means. But what I would like to do is just what you mentioned. Could they go through and say, could our department head say, this is what is left of these projected three areas, and this is what could be saved? If there's a deferral, is it a deferral of something like a piece of equipment that can be put to another budget year? Is there something that we can consider before we start looking at some of the other pieces that make sense? Because that was really covering everything. And a lot of those elements were to try to help us figure that out.
Now, are you talking about deferring what has to be spent by this June?
It depends. If it's a piece of equipment that could be put into next fiscal year or the following fiscal year, that may make sense. If
Well-
it's something we have to have, but not something we can purchase this fiscal year.
Okay, but we're looking at a budget the budget year coming up, July 1, 25. And that's where I'm saying we've got to tell department heads, show us how you can take 5% out of your budget.
I'm going to tie in a little bit to that. I mean, kicking it down the road isn't going to really solve it. I mean, moving it to a different budget. When I look at this, you know, we have a negative 4.8 unassigned balance for 2024. When I look at where we're at in cash, say we're roughly between 2 and 3 million with 3 outstanding AEP bills, a $4 million note, we're not headed in the right direction. It's going to take intentional action. You can do the math on what it would take to do that, and you know, you're not going to be able to tax your way out of it. There's going to have to be some cuts. And that's where we do kind of rely on Craig to kind of guide us through that. It's not a easy process, but for me, when you look at this and where we're trying to be, and just to get level, we don't have reserves to speak of. And that's another huge problem. Something catastrophic happens infrastructure related, we're in a really, really big mess. So, I mean, we can't leave out the word cut. No one wants to hear it. I don't want to say it, but that's just kind of where we're at when I look at these numbers. And, you know, time is not on our side. So, I mean, I do think that that's something that we got to look at. And also, their revenue increases. I do think that plays a part of it too. We've all talked about that too. But the urgency for me is now. You know,
I don't disagree, and what I was saying is, with any of those purchases that have been deferred, if they have been deferred to, you know, they're still out there, are there any that don't have to take place in the fiscal year? Because we really have 2 issues we have to address. We've got to get through June 30th of this year and make numbers make sense and work out together. And then next year, as we're planning and being able to make adjustments and projections, revenue adjustments and all those pieces, then yes, we're going to have to say, okay, the budget we have available for this activity is X dollars rather than X plus 5 or X minus 5 or whatever that is. I don't disagree with that. What I was saying is, to me, that work that was done and the discussions that were held with department heads makes a lot of sense to go back and say, what of that money is still eligible for us to look at potential savings, potential reductions to get us through this year. As we're crafting new budgets, we can certainly say, you know, give us a ceiling of what that looks like and help us make that decision. But I think it's got to be even more than looking at just 5% across the board. I don't know that 5% solves the problem. I don't know what that looks like, and that's where we have to rely on staff and department heads to come together to say, this is what we think are essential to make the function of this area happen, and you know, this is what that means in terms of actual dollars. This is revenue that could support that actual dollar amount, and I don't know what that looks like yet.
And I think that we've, had different discussions when we talk about a savings of X amount. There are a lot of ways to get to that without necessarily demanding every department do 5%. There's other options that we have where we can get that savings. So I think even to piggyback even further on what you guys are saying, some of this, we're looking at the next budget cycle, which is great, but I keep saying, what can we move Monday? What can we move Monday on this list? What can we move?
Well, that should have already been said to every department head. Any dollar
You had that
can't
discussion.
spend between now and June, don't spend it.
And what I heard the day that I had a department head meeting with the folks, they've already heard that. They're only spending in areas that have to be spent. The challenge is, even with that, I think there's going to have to be some additional adjustment.
Agreed. And I think that's what it comes back. I believe that maybe we need to look at we've outgrown our means and to be able to provide the level of service that we are. I mean, even going up on all these rates, I mean, it just doesn't really shut that window. So taking a whole look of approach again, because I don't think there's a bunch of frivolous spending that I've seen. So, I mean.
And we know that, we're running a tight ship staff-wise. You've come in, you've said that, our accountant has said that. I do feel like personnel-wise, we have people running more than one department. So I feel like we're pretty tight there. And I mean, I'm not sure it's going to be in Staples. So I guess we are back to, again, this is always my frustration level on this, is we know some of these things we have to do, and so at some point, we have to stop wringing our hands and just move what we can move now. Why wait another month to do these things, and then we need to cauterize the bleeding and make a path forward, and it's got to be in an umbrella approach. I think it's not either or. It's got to be a little bit of all these things combined. But again, I go back to, okay, what can we move right now to start at least cauterizing? And so when we look at this, what can we move?
Well, that was
On
the-
Monday, what can we move?
Well, that was the purpose of the list that I sent out earlier today with the budget opportunities, budget adjustment opportunities. It was a follow-up on what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and that was looking at things like curtailing hours or closing the drop center for a day
Got
on
that.
Park Road. Looking at, we talked about trash collections. I sent an email this afternoon, looking at revenues in our enterprise funds right now. They're actually, the adjustments that you made in the last, when you adopted this current budget, those adjustments are making a difference. Has it fixed the problem? I wouldn't say that, but it's certainly making a positive difference in those funds. That being said, I still think some other adjustments may be warranted as we go into this next budget year. Talking about trash collection, talking about the drop center. We talked about brush collection a little bit, trying to modify that. We're talking about perhaps a charge for leaf collection. I've heard several of you mention that. You know, one of the things we talked about, and this is where I got into in terms of, you know, we'll have to quantify how it affects staff hours and whatnot, but if you're looking at reducing hours at certain city facilities, you know, what are your thoughts on that, and where would those be? And then we can give you numbers on that. I think we've already, what I picked up by consensus already from the group was we're not going to have the summer concert series this year, which will be an opportunity for saving funds in next year's budget. That's not between now and June 30th.
So just for the record, I am not a fan of that, because we've had sponsors cover it in the past, and we've also talked about the fact that we really, the cost for admittance, it's not a self-sufficient.
So what I would say for that is we'll zero the budget amount for that, and if we're able to do
Yeah.
something with sponsorships or other support, a grant, whatever that looks like, then we can pursue that, but to zero out any city support for that. Does that sound reasonable?
And it would have to be voted to be approved with city funds.
Right.
If a grassroots effort wants to fundraise, I'm all for it, but even if there's a surplus of funds, I want us to vote on being able to bring any of that back. If a grassroots effort to do something like that would be fine, but, I mean, is
And I
that a
do
challenge
think-
for, on the city side, Craig, to
No.
leave it like that?
No.
Okay.
No, and I should have caveated everything I'm saying with, you know, I don't, none of these are things that it's like, yeah, that's what you should do, or yeah, that's what you should do. They're hard choices, and any choice that you make, as I see it, is going to be a reduction or a change in service expectations or what citizens have become accustomed to. But I will say this, as I've spent time in the numbers, talked to Callista, the expenses are extremely tight. It's not that you've got departments that are just rolling through money or doing frivolous things. Everything that is on the expense side appears to be, now that's not saying 100% everywhere, but what I'm seeing is it's extremely tight, and the services that you're paying for, you're getting. The issue's on the revenue side in terms of what revenues are coming in to address those services. But the problem with that is that's been, when I talk about a structural imbalance, that's kind of been the imbalance for the last couple of years in the budget. And it's like living every year and using your credit card to pay part of your expenses. In this case, you're using a RAN, but the expectations for the service level are either going to have to come down a little bit, and or the revenues to pay for those services are going to have to go up. or in some cases, both, to make this thing work, so.
And so, Guy, to your initial point, I think as we're asking Mr. Meadows to bring us a budget, that we have a budget that has factored in some of that, whether it's 5%, 7%, 3%, whatever that looks like, but also that we will know that this is what those savings look like, this is where we'll find that for 25, 26. Getting us to the end of 25's, the 25 budget, is what we're trying to figure out initially to say, is there something we can do that we could identify tonight, that we could try to put into action next Monday when we meet again, to give staff time to fully identify that this equals that dollar amount, here's a resolution to do that, that this revenue could be increased by this amount, here's a resolution to do that, for us to be able to try to move the needle. And I think that's the really hard part, is trying to do that. I just personally, I'd like to see from the things that were identified in July of 2024, what's there that is a possibility that we could move the needle with between now and next week when we get back together to potentially do a resolution. And then if there's anything on the revenue side, again, it's challenging because some of those numbers are actually looking okay. Some of the ones, it may be some of the optimistic projections that we have in the budget that we thought we were going to receive, but maybe aren't meeting that level, that we can't necessarily change with a rate or a fee or anything along that line. So
To that
think
point,
that's
was a
hard.
$4 million transfer, I was looking, is that, in 2025, is that budgeted for from the electric department? Because, that was a audited negative $400,000 figure for 2024, right? So in 2025, are we still counting on a $4 million transfer from the electric?
General fund balance, yes, sir.
Is that feasible?
It's coming out each month as an entry. At the end of the year, that, right now, in looking at the electric fund revenues, they're strong. What that does when you're transferring $4 million from the electric fund is you're taking that away from the electric fund.
Right.
And one of the things we'll be looking at in the budget is, are there opportunities to reduce that? As I've said several times, one of the challenges, and I hear, Guy, what you're saying as well, there may be areas that we wind up reducing more than 5%. I think what we've got to do is right-size the expense side of the budget to make sure we understand that. But first, what we have to do is understand where we are with the revenues, because you've got to know what's coming in, and, as staff, we've got to know what this council is willing to do in terms of generating additional revenues. If additional revenues are needed, then we can make sure the expense side balances to that. What I've seen in some communities is they do the expense side and then they estimate the revenues and then they just tweak revenues to make it balance the expenses. Well, that looks good on paper, but at the end of the year, it doesn't work.
Right.
And
To that point, trying to help us figure out where we'd be comfortable with revenues, do you have a number, even a monthly figure of because I think that would help us, because we can do the math on what an increase here and there would look like, and then where that deficit is, theoretically, wouldn't that be the cuts?
The first thing that we've got to spend time doing, and that's something that Calista and I are going to be working on over the next week, is really getting an understanding of the estimated revenues in the general fund for this year. That's real estate taxes, that's sales and use taxes, that's meals taxes, it's all of those revenues that were estimated, because honestly, if those estimates are coming up really short, then we've got to, number one, understand that and talk about what effect that has in this year's budget. But moreover, as we're starting to work on fiscal 26, you don't want to keep carrying that forward.
Right.
You want to take, okay, this is actual, this is actual, this is actual. We may have budgeted here, but if actual's been here, next year the budget better be here. It can't be there again.
Right. Agree. I think that's the biggest challenge, is there may be, that's a 3,400 line budget, right? Am I close in that? So it's a very detailed piece, and revenue makes up a significant portion of that. We know some big numbers: the real estate tax, personal property tax, pieces like that. There are some numbers that I think that are in there that we're not as familiar with, that we don't necessarily drill down to say, okay, here's revenue from this particular activity of the city, that over 3 or 4 years, this is what it averaged, this is what's currently budgeted, and this is what we can realistically expect for 25, 26.
Well, and I think that's why, in the email that I sent, I was trying to break it down based on other items, more specifically like the cigarette tax. Before, we were very, very low, and we haven't touched that for a while. We need to evaluate that. Business license, how much are our business licenses compared to other communities? How much is the personal property tax in regards to business equipment? You've got food and drink and hotel. There's a lot of these other line items that I do want to, look at, okay, what are the communities doing around us, and where do we align? So, I agree with you. I want to really, hone in, and what I see with this is the ability to impact the budget, but also spread it across a lot of different avenues, so we don't have the brunt just in one direction. So those are some things I'd like to look at, and to get some comparison points to.
Is there anything within our expenses that we would want to direct the city and staff to spend specific focus on in the next couple of days, to give us a number for next Monday to say, hey, we think this is something that's a savings we can experience from now until June 30th?
I think all the items that we listed I'd like a number on, and anything else in the time. And I know I want to be respectful of your time, because that's easier said. You can't just click and provide us those numbers. But if you think of something that we're missing on the expense side too, please let us know for the immediate. And then obviously it's a much bigger picture for the budget season, bigger conversation that we're having.
Absolutely.
I still think it's beneficial too, to see with food and drink, what does a penny look like on average? What does that number look like? What does that drive? Because it's really hard just from a line item to get that. So I am very curious to see if we increase these, what does the increment change?
Well, and one of the pieces, as we've looked at this, is some revenues are extremely strong based on the rates and fees that we established last year. But there are others that maybe aren't quite meeting the estimate of what we thought we were going to get. Why? What's going on there? Is that not being collected the way we thought that it would? Is there some issue with folks not being able to pay those bills? And I don't think we know that. I know that Mr. Meadows has been trying to drill down pretty significantly and find out, okay, this is at 45% for the year instead of 52% where we should be at the end of January. Why? What's going on there, and help us fully understand that picture. Is that something that's a flaw, or is that designed in? Our tax structure is a little different. When we set a rate for our real estate tax, half of that will come out or so in June. And so did that impact December rates more? We don't know that. And so we're trying to drill down enough to understand kind of what you're talking about. On a quarterly or monthly basis, are we plus or minus toward getting whatever expenses need to be taken care of? We thought, looking at the budget based on all revenues, that we were going to not only balance, but come out a little on the positive side when we had our meetings last year. We identified $1 million here, a couple $100,000 there, a couple $100,000 here. It appears that some of that is working and maybe some of it isn't, and so we need to understand the part that isn't.
Well, and I think we already know some of the part that isn't. We know that our revenue is extremely low. So I guess, again, I feel like we're talking a lot about it, and it's urgent, and we need to, I want action statements. So maybe by Monday, we come all with a list of potential cuts, and we discuss them, and then be prepared.
Why aren't we doing that tonight?
Well, I think you were thinking, I know, well, that's what I'd initially said too, but I think you were thinking we still needed a little bit more information.
Well, and what I would love to do tonight, and that's what I'd like to see, if there are specifics that you want us to evaluate to be able to give you a number, then we need to know what those are. In other words, I know several times I've heard, well, maybe we should curtail hours, or maybe we should close a facility for an extra day. that's a hard number to pin down until you say, we want to close this for a day. Okay, well, once we know that, we can run the number and tell you what
And
that's
it's
going
hard
to
for us
say.
to know because we don't know what that number is. So so
And
we're
let's
chasing
just-
our tail.
Okay, so on this list, let's just like pick one thing.
Park
I'm
Road.
so frustrated we're not getting anything done. So let's say on this list, there was possibly take one day a week off of the recreation center. So we agree that this is something that is, utilized during the week a whole lot. Saturday people come, let's see what looking at Sunday cuts. I'm gonna propose Sunday.
Yep. Close it, let's see what closing on Sunday looks like. It's already open 1 to 6. It's a 5-hour. It's probably not gonna shake the needle, but it's a start. I
No, my
agree.
question is, and you're probably a little bit more knowledgeable, I know that we have a lot of tournaments. Are those on Saturday and Sunday? Is that going to impact? Because we bring a lot of people into our community, so is that?
Certainly
Are we
on
better
Saturday.
to-
Sunday, I would think not. Well, and that's another thing. This will initiate that question.
Be smarter to reduce the
Well,
hours.
can I frame it a little differently? Could we say we would like to see a savings of 8 hours at the recreation center over the course of a week, whether that was closing for a day or opening an hour late and closing a half hour earlier? Could we ask that and say, what would an 8-hour savings be at the recreation center to start with, and then find out what that dollar amount would equal? Is that fair?
Well, I think we ought to do a per hour, because I'm thinking more than 8 hours. So, do it on a
That's-
per, for every hour that we're not working.
If that is equal across the board, because some hours may be easier than others if we have full-time staff there
Well, I would
versus
say on
part-time
average,
staff.
what does
Yeah,
it cost on average to run the rec center in a day?
Yes.
That's fine.
with that.
But he said he needs to know a day, because it's going to change depending, so that's why
Yeah,
he
I mean,
asked for a
and I
specific
think
day.
we say an average. I mean, things are gonna, unless, you're real comfortable in saying it's not gonna impact, the different tournaments and things and.
Oh, I definitely want to run that through them too. I do think that we need that input
I
before we
mean,
do
I'm
it.
okay with just limiting the hours and still offering the
Well, and I
7
think
days.
one of the issues too that we don't know, when we have something on Saturday, sometimes it pushes things to Sunday.
Right.
Because they can't take place on Saturday.
And there's going to, make no mistake, all these things are going to be inconveniences. And,
Of
and at that point, we're not going to drill out the inconveniences. We're just going to have to kind of grit our teeth and
Is
get
it
through
reasonable to say, can we identify at least 8 hours of savings and then identify what that per hour cost is?
Yes.
Okay. So that starts us with one thing.
Okay, library,
on the whole,
same thing.
yep.
We said cutting a day of the library. I propose Wednesday.
I'm sorry, Kelly.
The library.
Library.
We said the same thing about cutting out one day of the library. I'm proposing Wednesday, just to start the conversation.
Okay, well, is it possible that we could do something similar to what we just discussed with the rec center and say, what would a cost savings be of a day's worth of operation if it were spread out over the course of a week versus a day? Because again, and I will say it's harder on the library than the rec center a little bit because they're already closed one day a week. So that is an outsized impact,
Look again at.
a reduction
A
rather than
reduction
an
in
elimination.
hours, right.
Is that helpful
I like
or is that
God,
unhelpful?
yeah.
I do think we need to know an idea,
Sure.
again, as an average, and
Yeah, I like-
talk to the folks that, are running it to see if we do 8 hours, how would we do that? What's the best to serve the community if we need to cut those 8 hours?
And again, I want us to be extra careful too, because I know our funding for the library is a little bit different as well than some of the other facilities.
Get state
Because
aid,
it
yeah.
could impact state aid if we're closed on additional days. So that's something I think we need to consider, that if a reduction works or if a shifting can work, again, keep in mind that some hours have already been cost savings out in previous budgets, so that's part of it as well.
So then we need to know what those
Right.
requirements are,
Right.
don't you think? I mean,
Absolutely.
what are those requirements?
Right.
And I actually think I talked to Kelly a little bit about this, but maybe looking at what Park Road looks like being open Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think, I'm fine with that. I think that's perfectly reasonable. And if it's Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or if it has to be a Monday and Friday, Saturday, or something like that, whatever makes sense. That's where I'd want to hear from our operations people on this is the least used day of the week, or this is the day that we absolutely have to have open or it won't function properly. That would help me make that decision.
Do we have to be open all day long? I mean, I've got a feeling people go to Park Road
Sure, it may be, again, a
On the way
reduction.
to work and drop off some stuff.
They don't.
And in the evening.
I think it varies. to
Park Road
people.
on a regular basis,
Yeah.
multiple times a week for my trash, because I live on a private drive in Radford. So I can tell you that they don't. Like, this isn't gonna make me mad to take away days, but it makes sense to take away days, for sure. So,
What about a half a day on,
but we
Well,
can look at
again, that
that
where
too,
I'd
but
wanna
let's
hear
start,
from
let's, yeah,
operations
let's
how it
not get bogged
impacts.
into things
Yeah.
and just maybe start with just getting through at least this email.
About
Now,
brush
Can
collection.
I, but before we go further,
Can I hang on to that one too?
go ahead.
What if for the drop site, we give you an estimate of what you'd save for a day that you close? That way, if you
Yes.
decide 3 days, it's 3 times that.
Great.
If it's one day,
I
it's
think
one
that's
times that.
awesome.
and it could be that there are some, again, hourly adjustments that can be made, that can be tweaked. The other caveat I'd like to put out there, if our department heads can say, I can offer this equivalency of a savings instead of an actual closing.
Absolutely.
Whether it is a service that we offer within that facility or a program we do, can we give them that leeway to say, this is something that I can do that would be helpful, that we can do without for a period of time? Is that fair?
I think we're just trying to find a dollar amount. So, yeah, and getting that dollar amount, how we get to the dollar closure.
And I'm not convinced
Yeah.
we may not have to do a combination of those two.
Right.
Maybe, but
right.
I really want to be respectful because we have been in a period, and I'm so appreciative of all of our city staff coming together to try to help us figure this out and to give them the power and to push the needle a little bit that way to say, this is something we can do without for a year. This is something we can do without for 6 months, as opposed to having to reduce overall service that impacts everybody. Because I do recognize that, yes, every single thing is something to somebody, but some things are more things to some people.
Right.
And so that's where we need our professionals to help us.
And going down the list, I think Easter egg hunt, I think it falls in line with the 4th of July. I wouldn't approve of any city funds being used to do that. If a grassroots effort wants to get out, fundraise, great. It's a great event, but, I mean,
Well, the only thing that I hesitate about that is the email that was sent today says that a lot of that work has already been done, that the cost is kind of minimal. Is that, I'm agreeing with you. We
Yeah.
don't need to do it, but
Right.
if,
I'll get that quantified.
Okay.
And see, because I
think we're
I
all
know, I
fine.
was told that some of that's already happened.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't-
what I'm
I don't know
worried
the-
about.
I don't know the dollar of
Necessarily, yeah, 100%.
all in favor of not having July 4th, but we would all like to really have the fireworks if we can find somebody else to sponsor that. I will say that I put out some feelers that I'm hopeful about, so,
Great.
but I think we're all in agreement with that, so I think that's marked off. Summer concert series, same.
6
Right.
savings for us.
And the big, as I shared in an email as well, the big cost with the 4th of July has not been the fireworks, it's the overtime and man hours that are put in to staff and.
So that's one question I do have as we've been thinking through this a little bit. If we are fortunate enough to get a sponsor to help us with the fireworks, what additional staffing do our police, fire, and EMS see as essential to make that part of it happen? Because I don't think it will just be the cost for the fireworks. I think some people will show up to the park, and we'll have to have some management, and we'll have to have some fire safety, so that it may be minimal, but it might be $5,000, and we just need to.
might just close the road, I would think, kind of like we did with the flood
Yeah.
and say, don't come down here.
And that may be the case. I don't
Right.
know.
Other thing, and I know that there's a lot of discussion about this, is the aquatic center and what we want to do.
I was really surprised at those numbers, at how many people, because it's only $6, and that's a big number over our $14,000
A lot of people
cost or whatever it was. And I don't want to, I would say, see what our contract says. If
So
we
I
can
had
jump
an
back in
idea
it.
about that too. I think definitely see what the contract says. That feels like something that may not be immediate. I don't know. That's a conversation, and certainly it's a benefit that we can't just say we're going to do this because it's not our aquatic center, it's an agreement. I think there may be a possibility for us to have a cost sharing with that, to say we could potentially have a Radford Pass that we work with our citizens that for a reduced cost or some additional fee, so it's not maybe bearing the whole burden, but it still provides the access. because I do worry about that part, that they may not have the same access to the pool if we don't find some support for that.
Well, I mean, I like the idea of even just requesting that we suspend it temporarily.
if we can get
If
it
we
back.
can pause
Exactly.
it, then I say we pause it.
Yes. So
Yep.
check the contract out and let us
We
know
don't want
what our
to
options
pause
are there.
ourselves out of the option, because a lot of people use it.
100%.
But, you know, perhaps they would understand and
I
give us
am
a little
shocked at the
reprieve.
number of people that actually drive to Christiansburg
do.
to do that. It's a significant number
It's
of our
amazing.
citizens. Yep.
What is that number, do you know?
It's at least
just
300
looked
on
at-
average a month.
It's 5 years of
Yeah.
information
It's a
about it.
lot.
I don't remember where it is.
It was, yeah, I
internet's
sent so many
spotty.
emails today. It was,
Our base cost is for 200, and then anything above that, we pay an additional fee.
But you-
So you can kind of base it on that. It's hard to get an exact count, but you can divide out. I think it averages out to about 300 a month that use it, which is significant. And we have a lot of our seniors that use that for the therapy pool. So I want to keep that in mind, too.
I know it's on the list. Did you guys want to talk about the lease agreement with Welcome Center?
I think that has served its purpose for us. We know that it expires this summer. I think letting that go makes the most sense.
Yep.
I think we're there. I do think the one thing that I've always kind of pushed for is I don't know that it was set up for success being open 3 days a week.
Sure.
So I do say that obviously right now, given the financial constraints, that we do need to bypass going on this, but being open 3 days a week, it just wasn't set up for success. And I know that, we made a good faith effort and got this developed, and I hate to see it not work out, and I hope that somebody gets in there quick, but,
I'm really appreciative of the private First Street Properties that worked with us to help develop it. I think we ran into a problem when we weren't able to fully fund the tourism office after we had the tourism director leave and had to ask Kim to serve multiple hats with tourism and economic development. But to your point, I agree with that. Do we want to just say that's a 25, 26 budget item that we're asking Mr. Meadows
Yeah.
to drop? Okay. That sounds good.
Any other, so it says canceling any lease agreements with third party.
I think we have to
Is
look
there
at
any
that,
more?
right?
and I worded it that way because I'm not aware of any others, but
Okay.
I didn't know if the council, do we have any other lease agreements for properties that you guys are aware of?
the parking lot. Yeah.
What parking lot?
On East Main.
Oh,
There's that one with Norfolk Southern off the top of my head. I think that's the biggest one, but I can pull,
Because that does provide some challenges.
yeah. So,
Well, I know the Wells Fargo building pays for itself,
Right.
because so that to me, now we just need to make that space.
Yep.
Yeah, because it's a flush, it's not costing us anything, but certainly it's not bringing anything in, and it could. It's a great building in a prime spot.
Yep.
So the other thing that I had brought up, another unpopular thing, but you know what? I still think that what services that can be outsourced, we need to look at that. We need to get some bids. We need to discuss what are they. And we may find that we need to hold our course, but we also may find that for a city our size, trying to provide the whole scope, it might be an outdated policy considering the costs now.
Would it be fair to say we direct Mr. Meadows using his judgment based on what could be potentially requested in an RFP for city services be explored? Is that reasonable?
Yes.
And are
can we define
talking-
city services? I mean, that's a pretty broad
Well,
spectrum.
the one that comes to mind.
I mean,
that-
trash is obviously
solid
one of 'em,
waste
but,
is the one
yeah.
that comes to mind right off the bat.
Yeah.
We can certainly explore with some of the neighboring communities if there are other areas that they have outsourced that make sense.
What about the health insurance? That kind of surprised me that we don't go out for additional, even though claims are high and all that, there might be an Aetna or,
I agree with you on that. All I know is the history, and the history has been the city has not gone out for at least 5 years on competitive bids. Now, what I will say to that on the health insurance is through our third-party consultant, USI, they pretty much put it out to bid within the Anthem network because that's who we're in right now. They hold Anthem to the fire to sharpen the pencil, But the question is, should we put it out to a broader service? I think the answer to that is yes. We're in a situation this year where candidly, I think we're too late because we have to have renewals July the first. I mean, the time frame is not conducive. The other thing I'll say is I've shared with you too, the claims experience for the insurance this past year was not good. And usually that's not the year you want to go out, is the year you've had a bad year because you're going to pay it that way. But I absolutely think on a list that needs to be discussed with the consultant to bid it out.
But it did sound like that your guys did have some research to maybe make some changes that are a
Came
little
back with
bit.
several
Yes,
options that
so
we
I
need-
think we do
yes.
have some options there, and we can revisit bidding out when the time is better.
And I think on a positive note, things like that, activities that we can put in place, it doesn't help us in the next 3 months and even in the 25-26 budget, but it's beginning to structurally move some things that are going to get us in a better position in the long run.
Craig, I know you asked if there's any more information that we could give to you to be looking for. Do you also want us to go ahead and give you some direction for the 2026 budget, or are you exclusively talking about
So
Monday?
When this is a budget work session, it's all a budget. So not only anything that we can be looking at to try to bring this year in as strong as we can, but also what are you visioning out for 26? Because the department heads, Friday, Monday, we'll have, or when are the department head budgets due back? Oh, yes, they're coming in. We're right in the middle of 26, so yes.
Well, I think what we've all been talking about is how can we spread this burden out between increases along our rates, looking at those, and then also if you could come back with and quantify for us what a 5, 6, 7, we can narrow which numbers you'd like. Would you like maybe 3 percentages that we would like for you to see and a number on that? I mean,
When you say percentages in terms of reductions or?
so I just think just I look at it as, I agree, you can't just go 5% across the board and go like that, but maybe a number, a percentage of the budget that we'd like to see reduced, and then and then turn it over to you. Does that make sense?
It does. I do think one of the challenges is you may, by consensus, say, Craig, we want the overall general fund budget to go down 5%. Well, if it goes down 5%, but we still can't attain the revenues that we need to even balance.
Yep.
So I appreciate that and would certainly welcome that. The thing that the expense side concerns me for sure, because those are going to be hard decisions. The thing that concerns me just as much is what level of revenue is the city able to support to pay for the services? Because if we reach a point and we say, this is it for the revenues, we can't do any more, well, if we're still not where we need to be,
Then we have to get in that discussion. So here's what I would like to see if we could do this. Obviously, we're going to ask you to bring us a balanced budget when you bring it, and bring it based on realistic revenue projections as we're going through them now with what makes sense based on some of the things we've talked about. I think there's some pieces that maybe we need to be creative about revenue. Are there revenue sources that Radford currently doesn't pursue that other communities have looked at that are a little more innovative and unusual? That may be something to go out to the department heads to say, I've surveyed my peers, and this is something that is used as a revenue source in our community to support this activity. I think the other piece with it is, when we say 5%, when we're talking about all the things we offer, it includes our first responders, it includes our schools, it includes everything. That's a very different discussion as we go into that piece. And is it 5% of all funds that we fund, or 2% or 3% or whatever that number looks like, or is it only certain areas? And then that changes the math on those areas too. So what I would really like is, in your judgment, to bring us what you think is an appropriate funding level and an appropriate expense level for where we are with what we can realistically expect. And then if there's a gap, if there's an adjustment that needs to be made, your expertise can help us as sort of the doctor in this medical situation to figure out, these are our options to get where we want to be, that's sustainable, that can ultimately help us not only wipe out any deficit, but begin to build back reserves and to be on a trajectory for a more positive budget cycle as we move forward.
I think for where we'd want to be, or where I'd want to be, is obviously I'd like to get the RAND paid, and we'll have to talk through that. But then being current on all accounts payable, and then just getting to a flat neutral on reserves, which is still not good. And then start building those back. What level can we get to there? Whether it's a monthly figure, and, you know, kind of tasking you, and that'll help us piece together the expense and revenue side of it as well. Because, I mean, obviously it's going to be a mixture, but I understand your point of, hey, if your max capacity for revenue is here, I can work from there down type thing. So I see where you're at, yeah.
And it may be that we talk to our department heads again and say, okay, you know, this is where we are. Help us figure out that last little bit of 15, 20, 10, whatever that looks like, to get us there and to go. Because this is going to be a team effort to figure that out with, ultimately, we've got to vote on something and make that pass. Before we get too much deeper, are there other things that we would like to ask Craig to further explore to say, is this a savings? Is this something we can do?
I'm curious to know how much the city pays for a community fest. How much comes out of our pocket?
Or
Very minimal. The city paid for, the university paid for everything except for a very minimal amount of police and cleanup. We did not pay for any of the concerts, any of the spaces. Yeah.
$2,000?
We
I
got to
don't-
find out. Yeah,
Like an
get a
overtime
number.
report?
Yes.
And see what we
But that was all. They
paid
didn't
for
pay
that, but it
any-
was literally just
They paid for it all.
services in kind.
And what I want to bring up too is, it's even when you get that number, that's not a clean break, because it brought a lot of people
Yes,
downtown
it absolutely did.
into our businesses, and a lot of people from out of town that normally aren't here, getting to know our businesses and spending money, and so there was some revenue also with that event. What that number is exactly, I'm not going to be able to tell you, but I do think that, you know, when we're talking about these things, and there's a minimal cost such as that, I do get concerned, because I do think that this is also a area of taxation for us and exposure. So,
Well, if
but
the-
I know what you're saying, if
if
it's
the-
exorbitant,
Yeah.
If the university wants to help us more, then maybe they'd be willing to use their police and use their cleanup people.
Maybe we could breach that subject, but at the same time, they're paying for 90% of it, if not more. So, I mean,
Well, if they'd pay the other 10, it'd help us.
So
If
what
they
I'm
would.
hoping with something.
90% is a big help.
I'm
And
sorry.
it was, I think 90% is a big help. It's something we can look at for sure. I think we look at everything, but, I mean, they put that on. I mean, they really did.
I'd like
So-
to, I know one thing I'd like to see, and we went through it last year, is if we could go ahead and get a list of all the agencies we're on with the dollar amounts attached to
Yeah.
them. I think that there's a lot of things that we're going to have to,
Well, it may be a one-year pause for
Yeah.
some things, you know, things that we definitely feel are important and support, but it may be something we have to pause moving forward. And you got that agency request on that, and we're certainly looking at all of those pieces for sure.
Well, and that brings me back to something I wanted to make sure I mentioned tonight. I know that I emailed you about the decision that needs to be made on the next phase of the East Main project, that bids have been received, and, you know, there was a question of the city's cost if we proceed versus the city's expenses if we don't proceed, and it was almost a wash, ironically, and that was just because we have to still build the ADA sidewalks, we have to reimburse VDOT if we don't do it. If we do it, then yes, we have the expense. The concern that I've heard from staff on that one is if we go back to VDOT and say we're out for now, that once you come off the list, there's other communities that want to be on the list, and then it's really hard to get back
That's a
on the
poison
list.
pill that I think if we experienced any savings, which is questionable
Well,
that
I
we
say
would
it looked
actually
like a
experience
wash,
savings,
so-
that we would actually do serious harm to some revenue streams that might come in to support traffic and infrastructure and other pieces along that line.
Put you
I'd
at risk
struggle
with the
that.
other funding sources. I candidly,
I do think we needed to get out the message because the optics of us
Sure.
down there building and doing this with,
Yeah.
and our hands are kind of tied on this one. I agree, because if there were no, I all the way through Planning Commission have supported and agreed with the East Main project because I wanted to revitalize it. Now, given the situation, obviously, if there were no repercussions, I could not justify spending this when I'm talking about cutting from people's departments. Do we have anything, do we have a better feel of what's left to unwind with the East Main project cost-wise
Beyond that,
beyond that?
no. No, I know that when Melissa and Jay were in here a couple of weeks ago making the presentation, that's the next phase that is to be done. I do not know what comes beyond that. Now, what you can do beyond that, if you get this phase done, you check the VDOT box and the funding boxes, then you can say, folks, we have to pause here.
Yeah.
If you say we got to pause here after VDOT's already done work and they've already even done paving that we've got to address that, that's a different message than if you say we're pausing here, in my opinion.
No, I agree. I think, so there's multiple phases to what you're talking about. When we talk about East Main, this isn't the downtown trail connector project piece yet. We do have some opportunity there that we can further explore, but you're right, we've got to get out the messaging to explain what we're doing, why we're doing it. It's a multi-year process, and that it is mostly being funded with dollars that are being provided to us by VDOT for this purpose. So that's one of the trickiest parts with it. If we do that, and even if we experience savings, which it's questionable based on what costs we would have to pay that has already been expended by the contractor as we've developed these things, then we likely would lose money in the future, which would hurt significantly in infrastructure and transportation support. So I don't disagree, that's a messaging issue. The downtown trail connector East Main project is the big $700,000 piece that's a separate component. There are some questions with that I think we're going to have to explore. One of the biggest challenges is that's an additional revenue source coming in that could provide some support that if we choose to, we may be able to pause and hold off on, but it may also be an issue with having that money available to us, and it may just be if it goes away, and then we don't have the money. So
When do
we'll
we
have to
look
see
at that again? When does that come back up?
I think Melissa was telling us we were getting bids in on that, and then we'll have to look at where the bids are to see if they are within that money that we have budgeted between Community Development Block Grant and ARC.
So it's the CDBG money and then ARC funding.
Is this another amount that can,
reimbursement.
so that is a reimbursement? Okay.
But it's a quicker reimbursement, we think.
Usually
than some of
much
the other
quicker
things.
process.
So that's part of the question we would have with
Yeah.
that is, if we expend this, how quickly do we get it back? If we pause it, how much longer do we have before we actually won't receive those funds? And some of the CDBG money, we actually have to get federal approval to be able to shift those from project to project or year to year. So that's a little more complicated situation too. And I'm not trying to bring this up or say these
Well,
things to make it more complicated, but it's part of what makes it more difficult.
The timing is very interesting too, because I received last week the interlocal agreement from the Regional Commission for that project, and I have not signed it because I want to, before I sign anything like that, I want to fully understand what the obligation is. If it's 100% reimbursable, then I'll talk to you about that, but if there's other issues, yeah, we're not jumping in that one just yet.
Right.
All right, help me understand again. This $550,000 project, is that grant money? It's VDOT money, but is it through grant?
There's 2 or 3 projects we're talking about as part of this. The East Main piece that we got the email on from Mr. Meadows about the $100,000 or so for the ADA accessibility. That is a separate piece from the downtown trail connector and street enhancement project that goes from Tyler Avenue to about 3rd Avenue. The Tyler to 3rd project is the one that is funded with Community Development Block Grant and Appalachian Regional Commission money. And altogether, I think it's $1.3 million with those 2 sources pulled together. CDBG we have. That's federal money that is sent to us. The $700,000 from Appalachian Regional Commission That's money that we would pay and then get reimbursed for. And that is what Mr. Meadows was talking about, because the New River Valley Regional Commission has been the agency that has acted as the grant facilitator for us on that. And so we have to have that agreement with them to be able to move forward on that project. Couple of things on that. We already have the bids back on the sidewalk and the cut-in improvements that must be made on the further east Maid, which is down near Jefferson Street area and University Drive. That's 100,000 pieces. I don't know that we have all the bids back on the downtown trail-to-trail connector.
But I guess I'm wondering, is there a contract or something that says if we don't do this, that we're gonna have to pay back the 36 and then spend our money to do the 75? I mean, is that in a contract, or is?
The short answer to that is in the documents where we agreed to the project, I'm sure would be required. In other words, I pulled that email up, the $31,600 that VDOT has spent for the engineering work, I'm sure somewhere in that document.
So there, well, I guess
it
that's
says
the
we have to-
I'm trying to understand a document. So
Right.
anytime we get money or something like this from VDOT, there's some kind of document.
Yes, sir.
that we
Anytime
sign
there's a
off on?
project that includes VDOT money, any other funding, there's a master document, if you will. That's what I was referring to with the regional commission thing as well, that everybody signs and says, this is what you're gonna do, this is what you're gonna do, this is what you're gonna do. If you don't do your part, then here's what you have to do. And my understanding from talking to staff is the part that we would have to do if we told them we weren't doing that project is we have to reimburse the engineering, which is 31.6, and we still have to build the ADA accessible sidewalks at Jefferson, because VDOT, based on the prior commitment of us all being in, has already paved to that point, and that crosswalk has to be put in. We can't say, no, we're not gonna do that.
So our engineering department went through that
Yes, sir.
document or whatever and came up with all that. Okay.
So that's, and you know, the one thing there that I'll say, the expense of that project for the city's $111,569. VDOT will be paying, the total project's $557. So the messaging that we always need to say on projects like that is, yes, the city's spending for every dollar the city's spending on that project, somebody else is spending $4. And that's, so you're getting a $5 project for $1. You know, $557,000 project for 111.
Okay, thanks.
That's one of the hardest pieces as we go through this whole process that, you know, years ago when we talked about, let's get more grants to help us do what we need to do. It's bringing more revenue into the city. Most of those grants are not free and clear that you get, here's $1 million, you don't have to do anything. It's 100,000, it's 500,000, it's whatever. But that's still $1 million we wouldn't have that we need to be able to do the things that we need to do. So that's what makes it so hard. It's a perception that, gosh, we're spending money we shouldn't spend, but we would be losing hundreds of thousands or more if we don't.
But I agree.
Good return on investment.
It is, but if you gotta spend $100,000 you don't have for $500,000, it's a problem. And that's.
I don't disagree with that, but that's one of the challenges we have right now is how do we get this budget right-sized without hurting ourselves for other revenue
Future
streams that will
projects.
then help us further down the road.
Right.
I would like, for at some point, maybe even this week, I will say this week, I would like to have someone city side take me around and look at the properties that we have, because if we're sitting on properties, those need to get listed.
Agree.
It's spring, it's a good time to list, so if I can get someone to take me out, if you guys want, if someone can go, great, I'll do reconnaissance and send pictures,
I
whatever the
actually
case may
have
be.
that list, that we pulled that list together several weeks ago as we've been talking about everything, but I do think that's something that you guys need to consider.
Yep.
And, yeah, again, that would be one-time revenue. If you sell properties, you can't balance the budget with it. However, you can use that revenue to get rid of Iran and do a few other things to get you back where you need to be going
Right.
forward.
And we're sitting on them. Let someone else either pay taxes on them, build on it, create a business. We just don't need to be just sitting, just landowners. So if I can have, if they'd be willing to take me around, I'd like to do it this week. So by
Sure.
Monday
The other
I have
thing,
an idea.
potentially, if we are able to get some property turned over from city use that we don't have a use for, city ownership, to private hands, it might be developed, and then it is a continual revenue stream.
Right.
As opposed to single. I think we need to look at what we're talking about. It was brought up a question with Guy about insurance, and do you want to talk about that a little bit, or are you not prepared at this point to have a further discussion?
Well, staff's going to be meeting later this week to look at some options internally, and I'd rather have a better feel for that. Suffice it to say is employee health insurance has continued to increase. We're looking at a significant increase for insurance again this year. Employees do pay a portion of their insurance. We're going to be looking at how to balance that, also recognizing that it's a significant increase and how to structure that so that it's a minimal impact to the city and as much as we can, a minimal impact to the employees. But more to come on that.
Now, it's my understanding that they're not really paying, like, what we're going to find out in the larger world. Is it-
Employee-only coverage is not, employees do not have to pay for coverage if it's just employee-only right now.
So I think that's, one of the
Gotta look at that.
challenges, because we so appreciate the team that works with us to help make all of this happen, and we don't want to overburden those folks either as we go through, as we're balancing all of this piece. When we look at all of our obligations, is there any additional area where we need to be considering adjustments and changes that will allow us to get to a better budget situation in the next 3 to 6 months, and then in the 25-26 budget?
Callista and I had a conversation, was that last week with Davenport? Time flies. We had a conversation with Davenport last week. We're awaiting some information from them. We're open to any and all suggestions in terms of opportunities to look at any debt restructuring that we have, any opportunities to make some things easier from that front. Candidly, I do think that the city may be looking at least one more year for some level of a revenue anticipation note to tide us over, because again, there's no way to get all of this addressed in one budget cycle. There's just not. No, there's just not. I do think we can make some strong strides. I was, again, encouraged as I looked at the revenues on the enterprise funds again today. I have not had a chance to pull numbers to look at February yet, but I see some positive trends there, which tells me the adjustments you guys voted on in the budget for this current fiscal year are making a difference. Again, it's not going to fix everything by June 30th. It's likely not going to fix everything by June 30th of 26. But the key with all of this is we've got to be moving forward positively and not continue, I could tell from your faces with the audit presentation last week, the concern, and I understand that, and candidly, I share that concern with you, and it's not going to be fixed in one budget cycle, but you certainly got to show trends that you were addressing in it.
And I know when we look at some of the things that we're talking about tonight, they're smaller sums, but they do add up. And so I feel like, again, we keep paralyzing ourselves, like we're saying, all right, well, let's see what it'll cost if we save 8 hours at the rec. Why don't we say, as of next Monday, we're going to be running 8 hours less, and you decide what that looks like and let us know, and Monday we'll review that. Like, we know this is something we need to do.
Some resolutions, so what we need is for.
Action items Monday.
Action, but I mean, what?
I agree.
We've been saying action items, and then we say, well, we'll talk about it again, and then there'll be another, okay. I'm tired of that. Like, okay, the drop center, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. What stops us from saying, as of this week,
Can
like,
we have
why
that
can
all
we
on the
not
agenda?
do the small things? Why can we not move those small things?
Want more information. That's what's stopping.
Well, I mean, that's the information.
Yes, it's the.
I mean, it's not ideal, but we have one, and we're still going to keep it open. But not at the same level.
Yeah.
Heaven forbid if we find that we're just saving so much money that we cut too deep. I don't think that's the
I
case.
think we've made that clear. I think pretty much tonight, we can say it's effective immediately when we do it next Monday with some of those things. I think we've made it clear tonight what our desires are. I think there's certainly prudence in making sure that we discuss this with the actual people who are going to execute it for us, so we know what that means and that what their options are, if they can offer up, hey, here's an equivalent savings that I can find within my budget that takes care of that.
Well, I would like them to find an equivalent in their budget and us to make these cuts. We are not at an either-or position right now. So I actually still want to have the conversation with all the departments, even ones that we're looking at cuts on. What can we do internally to continue to save money? What can we do? So I don't see that as an either-or. I just really want the things that are small that we can move. I mean, for goodness sakes, I mean, we are not even able to do the simplest of tasks on some of
Do you need
this.
additional direction for us to be able to do more, or are you able, based on our conversation, to get some things done
I've got a
immediately?
list of stuff to bring back to you for Monday night that can be put in resolutions and voted on Monday night.
Thank you.
Okay?
And I feel like we need to review what you have. Let's see what you have, and while he names them, let's look at our list and make sure that it's comprehensive, because I know we all have notes on things we're looking at. So what do you have?
I've got, what if we trimmed 8 hours a week from the rec center? How would it impact tournaments? What if we trimmed 8 hours a week from the library? What does it cost per day to operate the drop site?
And funding on the library, we want to coincide it with the funding issue.
Any effect on funding?
Mm-hmm.
Easter egg hunt, what would it cost to eliminate? If we have fireworks, what are the costs associated to support that activity? Aquatic center, how's the contract worded? What's the per citizen cost? Can we pause it? RFP for various city services, that's looking into 26. Are there other revenue sources we should identify? That's going to be an email out to department directors. Listing of agency funding, sending out listing of property for consideration to market. That's what I got.
And did you do the drop center?
Yes. Yes.
And another thing that's, small, but we keep kind of dancing around is, we do provide the brush, the leaves. Is that something for now that we can pause? Like, can we say, for now, this is paused, and people can hire someone or load it up, but as of right now, these are things we need to
There's a
pause?
revenue side as well as an expense side. We need to know what that is before we say it's paused, because there may be a closer balance to that.
Okay. You mean if people are calling and they're, like with leaves, I'm not
Leaves are
paying for the
different.
leaves.
I mean, we could talk about that
So,
if
I
we
mean,
want to eliminate
And
that.
I know, and I want to evaluate that, like if people are paying out of pocket and the city's doing it and it's a wash, that's great, but some of this that's not what we're talking about.
Not to get too deep on this, what was happening previously before we did a separate leaf pickup was people were bagging them and they were going with sanitation, they were ending up in the landfill. So that was one of the issues that the leaf pickup was designed to eliminate. So you have a shifting of cost as opposed to elimination of cost if you go down that path.
Be well worth $25 one-time fee that no
And
one
that
would
may
ever
be what
blink
we
at.
choose to do.
I've shared that, I think, with many communities do that.
We do.
You have a monthly bill for solid waste, but then there's a $25 annual fee that's assessed either on your taxes or on ever how you want to assess it, but it's assessed, and that revenue goes to offset the.
Yeah.
It's not as good a deal as free, but it's still a good deal.
No,
I mean, I have a
absolutely.
ton
I
of.
think that makes more
talked
sense,
about that.
because I think one of the challenges we have with some of these things that when we cut, it doesn't eliminate a cost, it shifts it to another area. And that's the part I want to be cautious about before we say, let's just cut this out, because that may cause us an issue. One of the things with the drop center I do think we have to consider is, will that cost us additional money at the recreation center for those recycling facilities to be emptied? Because the drop center is where we currently have 50% of our recycling take place. So does that shift the cost then?
Or how hard would it be to make that accessible?
Maybe.
Well, I mean, when
I
it's
don't
full,
know.
it's full. So I would think that whether they were putting them there or the other place, I mean, it's the same amount. When it's
Right,
full,
but if
it's
you have
full.
to empty them twice as much at the rec center, there's an additional cost compared to emptying them at the,
It costs more to empty them at the rec center than it
no,
does-
but if you're moving that, you may not be saving as much. If that emptying cost, if that emptying the container.
2 times a week, and then you have to empty them 4 times a week.
Right,
'cause-
if that, we just need to be aware of that.
Yeah.
Is that a piece? Because that, recycling is part of it, and if we don't have the recycling at the same level, then it costs us more on sanitation.
Agreed. But to Jesse's point, I'd like to weasel all that out by Monday and go ahead and move.
Well, and another thing is, we talked about the rec center not being self-sufficient and having a yearly fee for that as well. So we can start, recouping some of that. So I still think that that's a conversation that we need to have.
I have a question in general about annual fees. So the rec center fee would be a little bit different than the brush collection fee, but how are those, are they sent out per, I don't know, electric bill? Like apartments
Well-
don't have,
Let's
But, you know-
do a brush collection fee.
yeah, brush collection's a little different.
Whoever gets a bill for trash
Okay, so
would then
that's how
get
it's
the bill
allocated.
for,
Okay, I
now-
just was curious.
now
I think
rec,
the rec center fee would be harder,
Yes,
because
that's-
how do you assess that? Is it only on property owners? Do you have it on rental property? If someone uses the rec center that's a renter, how do you factor that?
I don't think that's hard, because we managed to get property tax. So I think it's very similar to that
Just
tax
have to
ticket.
figure it out. I do think if you single out one department, you're gonna have to get a cost per analysis per person on each department. So if they cost that for the rec, well, then what does it cost for this department or that department? And that's how I look at it, though. 'cause
But
I
all
mean,
departments aren't serving the citizens in the same function. Some things are critical to their well-being, and some things are recreational.
Right.
So, I don't see that as an across the board. I see it as we are in a position to really prioritize.
Well, I'd be, looking at their budget, do you see anything out of whack with it? I think it's pretty low. But I don't know. When I've looked at some.
yeah, I like the technical term, out of whack. I've gone through this thing 2 or 3 times. No, I don't see anything out of whack. I see some numbers that I question in terms of how the budget was determined. And one of the things I've done and am continuing to do is, David left me a box and Callista pointed out where the box was, because I wasn't sure I had it, with all his scribing and figuring, and I've been sorting through some of that to try to get a better understanding of how some of this was derived.
Because it also ties back into kind of your piece with the Community Fest. It brings so many people in the city for tournaments and things like sports tourism is a big thing. I lived at Cochin, and people, when we have a tournament at the rec hall, drive through downtown, and there'll be jerseys flooding into Sharkies and things like that. So it's kind of hard to determine. But on a revenue piece, and I don't have my budget, well, I guess I have it somewhere in front of me, but there are fees associated with the tournaments. I do know that, speaking with the commission, they do feel our fees are pretty low compared to other localities, and I do think that that's something
Well,
that we
that's-
need to look at.
Well, and that's one thing, I'm sorry.
Like tournament, like
And
they
for
pay
youth
us?
registration and,
Okay.
they said just across the board, they
board.
have found themselves to be pretty low.
And that's one reason, one of the reasons I'm very excited to have Charlie Goins join in
Yes.
the team is Charlie has a lot of experience with that. And one of the first things that I'm going to ask Charlie to help us look at as we're going through the budget is look at these fees and charges, and, we don't want to shock the system, but if there's places that we're obviously lower than anybody else, we need to be talking about why is that? And
I think
Across the board, but I also feel, when we're talking about, the rec center and we're looking at the cost, I still feel like even the fees to the community, there's a maintenance. It was purchased, built, but then there's been no line item to really keep it up. So I feel like we still need to dedicate that. And the problem is, I think he's identified when we ask him with every department, well, is there a lot of fat? No, I don't see there's a lot of fat. So if I'm looking at everything across the board, I'd rather cut the rec center than the police department. And that's really where we're at.
So one of the things I'm hoping, like with Charlie coming on board with our other directors, is they may be able to do some of this work for us to say, okay, many communities have this fee, or have this support, or have this sponsorship. I think there are places, so like the rec center is something we've talked about. We have a lot of wonderful space that is viewed by a lot of eyes. Are there ways we could leverage that might offset that might take care of some of our added youth fees or things associated with that? So I think there's lots of opportunities, and we have a wonderful team working with us who may be able to help us find some more of those possibilities.
Well, and
that
I
will
just
get us
want to
there.
say, though, come Monday, if we don't know the exact cost of the savings on the drop center by having it Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, I'm not going to let that paralyze me, because we know it's a doable option. None of us like it, but it's doable. Again, it's not the police department or our fire and rescue. So we may not get the exact answers, but we know that's something we can move, and we know it's going to save money. So that's what we have to do.
And that's something we can easily switch back. If we
Right.
find that there's an issue.
Right.
I
Or
agree,
if all of a
we have
sudden
to make decisions.
there's a landfall, right, so Monday, I want us all to come with our proposals on things that we want to do, and let's hammer them out. But my attitude on this is, let's come with, I would like to propose that we do this, and then we either vote
Well, I
or we
think
don't.
we've kind of given some direction to Mr. Meadows to give us a series of potential cuts in a resolution that we can look at, as well as any potential
Well, I'm
revenue
just saying
recommendations.
action statement, because I still feel frustrated. I feel like we've just, and I understand we want to do our due diligence, but I feel like there's a lot of repetition at this point. So I feel like I personally would feel more comfortable, and I know Kelly's the same way, because we've had this conversation, like let's go. Let's go, because every week that we're not doing something is another week we're in arrears somewhere. So I think we just have to start making the tough calls, move the things that are least painful, understanding that that impacts everybody. I mean,
I agree. I did reach out to Craig today, and I do think that he made a good point, though, is that tonight we're going to give him something to put in the agenda so everybody knows and they can tune in and see it. Because I agree. I share your urgency. I'm ready. Matter of fact, I could confidently vote on several things tonight, but I do see the value in, hey, come Monday, there's going to be a published agenda. This is what we are. If you have any feedback, feed it to us.
And people can speak for
Yeah.
or against it. That's the other part of it.
I'm going to be prepared to make some proposals and just push it and to say, this is what I propose, and we go on the record one way or the other to move it. That's where I'm at on Monday.
And one of the goals for tonight is to bring all of that to staff so that they know what to be prepared for, what we're going to be able to put on that block, and how we're going to be able to move forward from there. Is there anything else within the budget, within the numbers that have been shared with us, that we would like to consider?
I have one more ask, and you can probably answer this without doing any research. We're all talking about revenue and how we need to look at different ways to possibly increase it. I know everybody on their mind is talking about raising different rates. Can you give me a time frame on when we would have to raise, cutoff of when we would have to decide on changing the electric rate? And the water rate?
Basically,
And
what can we
the-
move?
Well, no, I'm
quicker?
asking what's the time frame that we
That's a
would
good
need to
question.
decide
We have
on
to
these
give,
things, because they're different
we have to give at least a 30-day notice period,
for everything?
yes,
Okay.
for utility rates.
And there's like specific advertising,
Yeah.
public notice requirements, which are like 30 days and not consecutive.
So I would like to know how quickly or what time frame of the cycle, whether it be calendar or budget, that we have the ability to change those things. Is it now, or do we have to wait until some other time of the year?
You can,
Specifically utility rates.
well, yeah, you can
Have all
move,
the
you could,
electric, solid waste, real estate tax.
you can move
wastewater.
forward with instructions to change. You can move forward with wanting to make a change to the utility rates anytime during the year. But that sets off a process, because you have to advertise what those changes are.
Yeah.
You have to give public notice. So by the time, if you said tonight, I want to change rates, what are we, 1st of March? You're probably looking at 1st of May, 1st to middle of May before those rates would be in effect, which is why I really kind of bore down this afternoon on looking at the enterprise funds again. I don't know that you're in a situation where you'd want to do that between, if you said tonight and they were effective May 15th, you may want to change them again July 1. So my thoughts are, why don't we just make sure we've got the right information and change them July 1, if that's what you want to do.
And that's the kind of information that I was looking for. So when can we, or a suggestion of when you think, so we know when we have the ability to change some of those revenues, if we so desire. I'm not saying everybody wants to do that, but I know it needs to be a topic of conversation.
If you want it effective with the new budget year, which I would absolutely say, if you're going to change them, that's when I would strongly recommend you change them. You've got to make some decisions by, at the latest, mid-April to the 1st of May.
For all of them, or
We're
just
on
electric?
cycle for that.
Rates are like May 1st.
But yeah, tax rates for sure. May 1st has always been the magic number over the years for budgets with me, because anything that you have to do, the advertising for public hearings and everything, you have to have those by.
So next Monday, we're going to have some additional discussion and action items, but we also, I believe, Monday have a budget presentation, correct? So we're going to, I know we kind of talked about this a lot, but as we're moving forward for 25, 26, we're going to have a budget presentation Monday. And as part of that, we will begin talking about rates and fees to support whatever that budget will look like. Throughout the month of March and beginning of April, we'll be talking about what that budget number needs to be, what those fees need to be to not only accomplish the expenditure goals, but some of the other pieces we've talked about tonight, taking care of the revenue anticipation note and beginning to get us at least level, if not building reserve.
That's what I was going to ask you, Craig. How far along in the timeline do you want to know our threshold, where we're at for revenue increases, since you kind of build from there?
Every meeting from now till then.
Okay.
And I was going to say, I think the schedule says a budget presentation Monday night, but we're only getting the expense side back from the department directors tomorrow, so it'll likely be a discussion Monday. I think we put that on the calendar as a budget presentation. It
For
may
more
have
of an
should have said
overview type thing.
and discussion, and honestly, we're going to be doing that every night from now till you adopt the budget. So it may say presentation, discussion. It's, there will be a formal budget presentation in the not too distant future. But Monday night is more of a continuation of understanding what the tolerances are, what you're looking for, and I'm going to continue to. Along with Callista and Don, when, the challenge, and I know you appreciate this, and I've tried to share this with everyone as well. You're looking at the budget staff.
I know.
And
thank you. I know this is tough. I know all of this is tough.
And Dawn helps. The department directors are going to get an email, look out, they're going to get an email with asking for information as well, but we're it. And, the other hat that I have to put on some days is there's a lot of
Corner
other things
office
going
hat.
on in the city beside budget.
The corner office hat.
So, Jenny, we will publish an agenda and a meeting plan for Monday on Thursday, correct? So let's just say it's going to be Thursday, okay? Let's plan between now and Thursday to go on and identify those things that we want to have on the agenda. That'll be action items. It'll include our regular meeting agenda as well, so that folks can come speak for or against those things next Monday as we talk through them. Is that fair to everybody?
I'm gonna type up and see.
And I still,
Is there a specific format? That's what, I guess if I'm drafting a resolution, or Craig and I are working on drafting and we can get together and do that. Do you want these as separate resolutions, or are you going to want them?
I think it can
as
be a
one, like-
resolution with pieces in it, but we need to have the ability to either say yes or no on those things. And again, some of that may depend, I can't speak for what everybody's going to do, but it may depend on who comes to speak for or against things next
And it can-
Monday.
And it can, you can also do a lot of this by simple motion unless.
Right.
Yeah, so
And I'm fine with that.
that's
Yeah.
also perfectly acceptable.
But we'll list those things that we're talking about so that people are very aware and that we're including the community in this engagement.
Yep.
And just to, again, to drill down, I still would like to look at where we're at in comparison on our cigarette tax, our business license, the equipment, food, drink, hotel. These are things I still want to be able to
Absolutely.
compare.
I can assure you, we won't have all that by Monday, but we will have it as we move into budget because there may be recommendations to increase some of those that you guys need to see the comparisons. So absolutely,
you.
we're going to get that. That's one I don't know, I don't know who we can
I get
put
it.
on that to get, but yes, we will have all of that.
And are any of those things that we can move sooner or no? Are they, again,
To the taxes or fiscal year
Bound.
appropriations. Rates, like I said earlier, rates, utility rates, you can adjust anytime with the proper notices. But yeah, tax rates in particular, property, personal property, cigarette, business license, business equipment, food, drink, hotel, all of those generally are done on a fiscal year basis, July 1 to June 30th.
okay,
Let me say something here. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be here Monday. I'm going to call in.
Okay.
But I planned this trip and money's been spent before I even decided to run for council. But anyway, I want to understand, is my understanding, we're going to have these numbers that we asked, an 8-hour day, are we going to have that by Friday to look at, or are we only going to see it Monday?
No, we're going to do our best to get it to you Friday. Now, again,
Because-
this is who's getting it, and we're going to,
Okay,
I've got some thoughts, and it won't be, I was going to say this in a comment earlier, it won't be, okay, if you trim 8 hours a day, it's going to be $400.82 or something. It's approximately X, because what I think the easiest way to figure some of this is going to be is whatever the hours of operation a year are for the rec center, we take the total budget, divide it by the hours per year. If you're cutting 8 hours, you multiply that, whatever that number is, by 8. That's a pretty good approximation. Some things may be more, some things may be less, but
Yeah.
and that's, yeah, so.
hearing us say, we're going to do some voting on doing these cuts Monday night, right?
me propose that.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Willing to make changes.
So what is a resolution going to say?
Well, when a resolution is just the form of your vote. I mean, it's not, the resolution will say the Radford City Council agrees that the city is reducing hours at the city rec center by 8 hours per day.
Well, how are you going to know until we decide what that's going to be?
We'll
How
adjust it as we go.
You can sort of, I
We
can
can adjust the
create like a
resolution
draft,
as we work out the meeting.
resolution for you guys to have in your packet and sort of work from, and we can work, we can work over it throughout the weekend and into Monday and into that work session. And I can even sort of tailor it in the work session prior to the meeting at 7 and just have it. And Guy, I'm happy to email it to you or text you a picture of it, if that's the easiest thing to do with.
Almost like a
with you.
template, kind of,
Yeah,
right?
it'll
And then
just be
we'll
a
fill in
template,
the-
and it'll just be like,
Help
whereas
us
the
get there.
Radford City Council makes the following adjustments to the budget.
That's
these
the perfect word.
proposes
It's a
these changes.
template. It's not,
So do we fill in the template Monday night? Is that what you're saying?
we will have it filled in based on what we've heard tonight.
We'll adjust it.
But if the
If we need to.
council decides to adjust it, you can adjust it.
Write these all down.
A motion to adopt the resolution. We will work on adjusting the resolution as needed, and we'll have a motion to adopt the resolution. Does that make sense?
I'm still not sure that, yeah, I understand how, no, it's not making sense
So
to me.
most of the things that we do as council is by resolution, that
Correct.
we do those pieces. That is a mechanism to help us get these things done that we want to do, and to have it be something that can be reflected in the minutes appropriately.
Okay, but how is that resolution going to already be typed up?
So we're going to write what we think we will be able to do based on all the things we've talked about tonight. And then at the meeting, if we need to adjust or make changes, we can make those changes as we go through. So what we would do is say, instead of 8 hours, it's 7 hours, or whatever that number might be. We'll make that adjustment next Monday as we go
So
through that
we'll
process.
have the resolution, we'll
Correct.
discuss it.
Correct?
Then somebody will read it with the number that we've all decided and agreed on.
Sure.
Okay.
But if a simple motion works better, we can always just
I mean,
do
it's
that.
fine.
I was gonna say.
It's fine. What we're going to do is we're going to have a mechanism to be able to reflect the changes that we're going to make to the budget process.
And those will all be documented in the minutes. So whether you do it by resolution or simple motion, I am happy to, I mean, we try to type those out verbatim and get it done exactly right. So, yep.
Trying to figure out how,
Get
because
it taken care of.
resolutions are normally in the packet, already set up.
And that's okay. We
or-
can make adjustments to them as we go. Anybody have anything else?
Do we have a work session on Monday? Because I have it on my calendar, and I just want to understand if we do.
On the budget calendar, we have, yes, it's on there for 6 PM on Monday, correct? Or 5:30? Did we plan for, was it 6? Okay. Do we need more time to move it up to 5:30? Because Monday's a regular meeting.
Should be fine.
Okay.
That's the presentation.
It says discussion on the calendar. I pulled it
I
up.
thought,
Yes, sir.
surely to
You,
goodness.
presentations on St. Patrick's Day. Make sure you wear your
Okay.
green.
Is on
Okay.
the 17th, and that is, here's the
Okay.
budget as best as we.
Okay. So is there anything else anybody has that they'd like to share this evening?
Just a thank you to Craig and staff. I know that we've asked a lot of, all you guys, asked a lot of you all in a very short amount of time, and just thank you. I know that, and maybe one day we'll not shoot you 10 emails, but don't count on it quite yet, because I know they keep coming. But thank you for all you're doing and helping us get these figures, so thank you.
Well, the city has a great team, and without Callista Dawn, those department directors, I mean, it's, and I shared not a frustration, a challenge earlier today. I mean, Radford is a very active community, and, you know, I would, you know, the old CPA numbers guy in me, I'd love to sit in the corner all day and crunch numbers all day. I'd love it. But there's a whole lot of other stuff going on during the day that I'm helping you deal with too, and it's been tough to pull it all together, but we'll get it done. We'll get it done.
Too, and I am frustrated, and I want to make sure that you know it's not in your direction, or, I'm feeling frustration, but I appreciate the whole entire team. It's outside of that, so.
It's going to be
Thank you.
very encouraging for candidates in the coming weeks who look at this position to see the resolve that this council has to get this issue addressed. That's
Thank you.
very positive.
And I think, too, I want to thank everybody for all of their time and energy, and including all of our citizens who have reached out, who've asked questions, who've expressed concerns. You know, nobody takes this lightly, and we're trying to work through this for the best for everybody in this community. There's no ulterior motives. There's no desire to do anything one way or another just for the sake of that. This is ultimately trying for us to have the most robust, sustainable process, economy, and budget that we can for the city of Radford, and to serve our citizens, to serve the New River Valley, to serve this community as best we can. So I appreciate everybody's efforts and energy. We will stand adjourned until Monday night. Thank you.
When you head out?
Sunday, we're going to Kiowa Island. Yeah.
Don't have to, you'll.
Do what? I'm sorry.
I think I started to write it and then